Hello.
Hi.
What is the different types of question types used in interviews?
There are 5 mostly used types of questions. To start with, there is open questions, which give opportunities for development on an answer, and normally means no one-word answer. If an open question is answered with a yes or no, it doesn't answer the question. Then there are closed questions, which are questions that require a short answer, could be one word, normally yes or no. Thirdly, there is direct and indirect questions. Direct relates to the subject with little or no opportunity to venture off, and indirect is relying on the interviewee to understand the question that is asked and it doesn't offend the interviewee. The fourth is suggestive questioning, which is questions that implies an answer before it is actually given. And lastly, gut question is the question that the interviewer goes in for the kill. They ask a question that they couldn't until they knew that it was the right moment. An example of these questions is the Newsnight interview in 1997 with Paxton Michael Howard interview.
Mr. Howard, have you ever lied in any public statement?
Certainly not. I gave a very full account of the dismissal of Derek Lewis to the House of Commons Select Committee and to the House of Commons itself in a debate that took place. There can have been few decisions that have been subjected to more close and minute scrutiny in recent years than that decision. It was a decision that it was necessary for me to take after terrorists had escaped from Whitemoor, other dangerous prisoners had escaped from Parkhurst, and an independent report had found that there were serious weaknesses in the management of the prison service from top to bottom.
Have you ever lied in a public statement? This is a suggestive question. It allows the interviewee to change whatever wrongs they have done and set it straight. This also hints towards something without actually mentioning that thing. It was effective because it hinted towards the fact that there was a lie in his statement without getting the interviewee upset. This could be answered as a closed question, but also an open question depending on how the interviewee decides to answer it. That question and the question followed up is, do you wish to change anything in your statement? This also adds to the open question and tries to get the story out. It is a suggestive question which hints to something that has happened without mentioning it before. However, it could also be a closed question too.
What are the different interview styles?
The different types of interview styles depend on what the interview is based on. Hard news styles about the news is always relevant and always new. These can be found on TV shows like Question Time. Another style is combative. It is called that because it is a battle between interviewer and interviewee. It is trying to get to the truth that the interviewee does not want to spill, which leads on to the next style, which is investigative, interviewing to get information. An example of this is Louis Theroux and the Worst Family Ever. Light-hearted is interviewing someone for something that isn't negative and there are no hard questions. Promotional is advertising something through interviews, like a film. It's normally light-hearted. An example of this is a Graham Norton show because it's usually a promotional interview and it isn't serious.
And now, here's the thing. You're on stage in the West End, and obviously people come to see you and you get confident, you get nervous. But do you get nervous when your family come? Because they don't sugarcoat what they think, do they?
No, my family, they're very supportive, but they don't feel the need to, you know, if they don't like something or they weren't that impressed or they were a bit bored, they'll say.
What is the structuring of an interview?
The structure consists of 4 different sections of questioning. The first being the introduction questions. This is an introduction to the interviewee for the audience and to relax the interviewee at the start. This also builds a good rapport. This includes questions such as, how are you? If it is a long interview, it will normally have 3 introduction questions. If it is a short interview, it will normally have 1 or 2 introduction questions. The next stage is development questions. This builds a rapport with the interviewee further. It gets them used to speaking to the interviewer and getting more comfortable. These questions usually link to the key questions. Unlike the introduction questions, this has no limit. The third stage is brought in by linking the development questions. This is the key question stage. This is the most important questions, which are the actual interview. This can include the gut question, which is the question that the whole interview is about but isn't normally asked. The last stage is the conclusion question. This is finishing the last informational bits from the last stage and getting onto the fun questions to lighten up the interview at the end. Another structured technique for interviews is the camera angles used to make the interview look better. The first one is to the camera shoot, which is getting the interviewee to looking into the camera for the interview. This needs to equal this needs equal talking space. The interviewee needs to be looking just above or next to the camera. This gives the audience the position of the interviewer. Another style is side-on. The interviewee normally is on the right-hand side with the talking space larger than the person, sometimes with an over-the-shoulder shot of the interviewer. This gives the audience sense of voyeurism because the interviewee doesn't look into the camera. The last style is artistic or unusual style, which breaks conventions because it represents artistic and unusual nature. This is normally unsettling for the audience.
Is it important to have good communication skills when doing an interview? What would you need to consider when interviewing?
Most interviews rely on building a rapport with the interviewee. The interviewee will feel more comfortable if there is a build-up of friendly atmosphere. The way of building a rapport is simply by asking things like "How are you?" and "How have your day been?" at the beginning of the interview. The types of body language you use are also a good communication skill because it helps build the friendly atmosphere. Things such as handshakes, hand gestures and eye contact are classed as positive body language. Body language makes up 50% of an interview. If you are slouching or avoiding eye contact, it could send off a negative vibe to the interviewee. Another good communication skills for the interview is words. This, however, only makes up 7% of the interview. This means using words like hello and positive words. This can build up the atmosphere to make it fun and exciting or meaningful if it is a serious interview. Tone of voice is also how to make an interviewee feel more comfortable. The tone of voice makes 38% of the interview. Because if the tone of your voice is happy and friendly, it builds a friendly rapport. If you're moody and unhappy, it could build a negative rapport. An example of bad communication skills is a Russell Brand interview with the MSNBC. In this interview, the interviewer in the blue dress doesn't think about her clothes and bends over. This could be stepping over the friendship border and build a bad rapport. She speaks too friendly but with a nervous tone of voice, and she is acting timid near the end. This conveys over and makes her look unprofessional. Phrases like "apparently he's a big deal" and "first time I've met you" made her seem rude and unprofessional. They also kept referring to Russell as he and him, which makes Russell uncomfortable.
What type of techniques would you use when doing a telephone interview?
The techniques used in a telephone interview are like the ones used in any other type of interview, except the interviewer and the interviewee cannot see each other. That is the only difference. The techniques used are such things as treating it as a face-to-face type of interview. This includes smiling, because if you smile, it makes your voice sound more positive. Another technique would be to listen, which may be obvious, but you can understand and hear the interviewee properly, because then more questions can come from the interviewee's answer. The negative about phone techniques is that you cannot judge the person's reactions as you would face-to-face. This means that the questions asked cannot be too personal or harsh. It's normally friendlier to ask questions which the interviewee can get out of asking if needing to.
What are the different journalistic contexts?
There are many different journalistic contexts. There are newspaper, television interviews, and news/sports. Other journalistic contexts for interviews can include radio, online digital print, feature writings, books which are just interviews. These different contexts for interviews can change the conventions and the information that is being portrayed. Newspapers have interviews in to help support the information that they are including in the newspaper. These will often not be entire interviews but include single segments that are used to support certain opinions. The issue with that is that it can be seen to be subjective in the way of manipulating information and audience views for their own purposes. It turns subjective, which means opinionated. These can also be in magazines. However, in magazines, they are usually light-hearted and to be used for more promotional uses. Magazine interviews usually consist of a celebrity talking about something that's big and happening for them. This is an example of magazine interviews. You can see that it is a magazine interview because it follows the codes and conventions of a magazine interview. Such things as a quote at the beginning, at the top of the page, with an introduction by the interviewer at the beginning of the text. Another code and convention is that the question being asked by the interviewer is in bold and the answers are in normal writing. Television interviews are for informational and educational purposes. Television interviews usually follow the formula of having an interviewer and host who asks a series of questions at the interviewee, normally about current events in the world. The style of interview usually is determined by the topic at matter and the interviewee or interviewer. Television can be a friendly interview about something happening in a celebrity's life. An example of this is...
Russell Brand, who are you to edit a political magazine?
Well, I just suppose like a person who's been politely asked by an attractive woman. I don't know what the typical criteria is. I don't know many people that edit political magazines. Boris, he used to do one, didn't he? So I'm a person with crazy hair.
This interview follows the codes and conventions of television interview, which are such things as framing. Usually with an interviewee to the left or right, and normally filmed in close-up with a medium shot or mid-shot. The interviewee looks at the interviewer and not the camera, and is normally sat down. It's rarely used music, and when it is used, it is significant with the meaning, and lastly, the questions are usually edited out. Lastly, news and sports will include interviews which will be used to represent current affair, and this will usually take on an opinionated view. Some news interviews can take an investigation approach, and therefore connote their subjective opinions throughout. Sports interviews are seen as impartial interviews because they are about a recent sporting event. Impartial means objective, but only giving opinions to those who are worthy, who are important enough. This will normally be an ex-sports player. Interviews can happen either in a studio. Journalists have to not inflict their own opinion onto the subject. They can, however, take an investigative approach, which is typically in a formal style. For radio, there is a host which carries the show. They introduce the celebrity and discuss back and forth a bit about the celebrity and what they are advertising. Most of the time the interviewee will be a musician, as that is fit for what is found on radio shows. The interview will be light-hearted and serve to promote the interviewee.
Interviews are done for many different reasons. Can you tell us the different reasons for the interviews?
There are four main purposes of an interview. Research is one of them. This is a type of interview which is used to enhance the audience's understanding of a topic, and also finding out information about the topic too. The normal type of interview which will do this is the science type of programs like Discovery Channel or on Newsnight. Informational is another purpose. This is usually solely concentrated on representing information in a clear way. It is about presenting information, not finding it out, unlike research. The information is already known. An example of this would be Graham Norton's show, because he already knows the information and is giving it back to the audience in an interview style. Interpretive style is expressing or explaining an opinion of an interviewee normally. This is used when a celebrity has done something wrong and they are trying to justify their actions. This is normally where someone will be held accountable for what they have done. An example of this will be any Jon Snow interview. Lastly, emotional. Emotional is allowing the audience an insight to a situation in a way that they will create an emotional reaction. This emotional reaction will be laughter, empathy, or sadness.
Can you expand on research and emotional, please?
The main purpose of research is to gain and help audiences gain a deeper understanding to the current issue. It is also to collect relevant facts, quotes from the interviewee, who is normally a witness to a bigger current event. Research interviews are normally the most common interviewing style because most interviews are to find out facts, whether it be from celebrities, new films, or a disaster in a different country. The positive about a research interview is that it is normally reliable because it is the source of information that being interviewed. However, it's also a bad type of interview because it can also be seen as very one-sided and even manipulate the interviewer or interviewee's point of view. To expand on emotional purpose interviewing, there is a clip of Death Metal Eagles after the Paris attacks. It is a good representation of the emotional interview because the questions are hard-hitting for the interviewees and they show huge emotion towards the interview which gets the audience to feel the emotion too.